Good afternoon. Welcome back to At Center Stage at the NAFEM show. I'm Charlie Serrata from NAFEM, and we're glad that you joined us for this afternoon session on supply chain and lessons learned. I want you to know this session is being filmed, and it will be posted to N+, the show app, after the show. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to explore lessons learned from the world's global supply chain crisis. And it's been unlike anything that we've ever seen. We've got a great panel of experts, so we want to get right into it and get through a really spirited discussion. I hope it's a hell of a lot of fun, because it was last night when we were prepping for it. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the folks who are with me today. We've got Dave Brewer. He serves as executive advisor for Middleby Corporation. Dave previously served as the company's EVP and COO. And this includes 115 operating brands, and he led 20 presidents and group presidents, right? Yep. 40 years of experience in purchasing, supply chain management, manufacturing operations, sales, technology execution, international business development. You name it, this guy's done it all. A lot of brands. How do you keep all those plates spinning?
I have a great team. I used to have a great team. Now I'm retired.
Okay.
And they're still there, spinning plates.
Very cool. All right. Next, we've got Ray Kahn. Ray is the CFO of IPC, which is the Purchasing and Services Co-op for Subway franchisees, easy for me to say, right?
Yeah.
In the US, Canada, Puerto Rico, and US Virgin Islands. His background includes senior leadership roles in recycling and finance with Restaurant Supply Chain Solutions, LLC, the exclusive supply chain company for Yum Brands. Ray, congratulations on the successful Subway Series marketing campaign.
Yeah,
last month, I think it was, Nation's Restaurant News credited the campaign with increasing same-store sales by about 8% in October, right?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, we had a great mix with the Subway Series. I mean, we want to do a lot more, and we got some great talent actually in the audience who's going to be helping us execute that.
Great, great. Next up, we've got Joel Neikirk. And Joel is president and CEO of RSI, which is the Independent Supply Chain and Distribution Co-op for the Burger King system. Joel leads a team of more than 90 supply chain and tech pros. And before becoming CEO, he served as chairman of the RSI board of directors, as well as the CEO of Mid-America Hotels Corporation and Brewer Restaurants, which is a Burger King franchise that operates Burger King and Popeyes restaurants in the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And so my quick question to Joel would be, does ketchup run in your veins?
It does, absolutely, sir.
Okay.
All red.
Okay, so when you donate blood, it comes out and
it still comes out red.
Comes out red, okay. Next up, we've got Justin Tallio. Justin serves as manager engineering for Taco Bell. He's responsible for all back-of-the-house equipment smallwares, including innovation, testing, implementation, field support, and quality assurance. And not only does he do that, but he also plays a key strategic role in development operations, food innovation, and supply chain to craft the future of the back-of-the-house restaurant design principles and criteria. Justin, what is the best part of your job?
That's a tough one to answer. I think restaurants are such an awesome environment for people, and so many memories happen. So to be a part of that on the back end is so cool, to enable such great experiences for people. And then getting to come to NAFEM and talk to people who are passionate about these things is awesome too. My wife's sick of hearing me talk about restaurant operations all the time. So it's a lot of fun to get to talk with you all today and get to see everybody at the show.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks to all four of you for being here today. We want to get to the topic at hand. And just to kind of set the stage for a little bit, like all manufacturers, supply chain challenges threaten NAFEM members' ability to fulfill orders, control costs, and grow. And we've all experienced it. It's nothing new. We expect these challenges to continue this year in what we term as about a $15 billion industry, according to NAFEM's size and shape of the industry study. So considering everything at play, labor, transportation, shortages of raw materials and components, how can our industry move forward beyond the expectations and use lessons learned to move forward? So how do we do that? Dave, I'm going to turn to you first.
It's such a complex question, right?
Okay, right.
So you're trying to capture all the emotion and the hurt and the pain going through COVID, right? And you turn you turn that into a business opportunity, right? It happened to us, and then now we're trying to make it happen for us, right? In a good way. Right. You know, I think that what you have to focus on from a supplier's perspective is the customer's needs. And what they need, in my view, is they need speed of service, right? They need reliability of equipment. They need supply of equipment. They've got labor issues, they've got cost of food issues, they've got packaging cost issues, and all that transforms the back of the house from an equipment perspective and a technology perspective.
Okay.
So it's the same thing as Middleby. We turned our supply chain into an advantage during COVID, and I think they have the opportunity to turn their supply chain into an advantage for their individual brands, in my opinion, by thinking differently.
You know, Dave, I would say I mean, you mentioned relationship is so critical, like in our business, like, you know, an example, like we were talking within our teams, it was like, we did a POS rollout in 2020. And so like actually the POS vendor actually brought it to our team's homes to show like what the kit looks like. And so they approved it. They literally were outside the door. I mean, like through the you know screen, they were like having these discussions, and then they rolled it out to 19,000 locations all in 2020. I mean, that's heroic work. I mean, both like on our team's efforts, but also our vendor. I mean, but it's all due to relationship, right? Like that you can't get that done without having a lot of honesty, integrity, and trust between the two parties.
For us, it's been more evaluating multi-sourcing. I mean, it's tipped our hand to a certain extent to look for additional supplier options as some of our suppliers have actually struggled in regards to that supply piece. I couldn't agree with Dave and Ray as well too in the communication piece. Our franchisees need to know what these lead times are so they can be proactive and placing the orders, and that transparency and the value of that communication and its accuracy couldn't be even more precedent today. The other comment I'd make is I think the industry needs to evaluate just in time. That worked at a point in time, but today there's an expectation of its availability, and because of these hurdles that the manufacturers are seeing with various different components, an evaluation of using some of that capital structure to actually stock some items, work with their brand partners and their customers to make sure that they're not going to get stuck with those items is going to be really critical for the future.
Any thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, I think we were in an interesting kind of situation compared to some other brands because Yum Brands has the 4 concepts. So we really were forced to work with each other because we had so many issues that we were working with. It drove innovation between our teams and collaborating and trust in each other in the brand within the Yum brands and speed to market. And some of that stuff we've learned a lot of how we can move fast and how we can do things together and collaborate and build trust within Yum brands ourselves and with our suppliers. And we're going to try to keep that going where we can partner with the other brands, be strategic about what we're purchasing for Taco Bell, what we're purchasing for Pizza Hut, KFC, and the Habit Burger Grill. So that's going to be something we're going to make a focus going forward to make sure we can keep the momentum going with that.
In addition to those initial thoughts, are there any other additional learnings or takeaways that you had from this experience that you'd be willing to share? Was there anything that stands out? I don't want to spend a lot of time on navel gazing, but just in terms of a lesson learned, is there one specific thing that you learned maybe?
I would say we don't have to have custom everything. Like we historically have customized everything to be exactly what we need, but there's certain things that we've gone back and looked at that we don't need anymore. They're not a requirement anymore. There's better stuff we can get, and that was a big stranglehold for us on getting special parts just for us. Right. And then any issue with those components is putting a whole piece of equipment at jeopardy. So we've really revisited those things to try to streamline all of our equipment, really.
For me, I would say relationships went to the top of the list, right? Obviously, you have this expectation that you've developed this long-term partnership and so forth, but this is where it really rises to the top when you realize that they're having to basically say the have and have-nots, and so the importance of making sure that that's a long-standing and not a strategic relationship, not transactional and so forth, and being committed to that was probably the biggest critical thing that we've realized out of the outset of COVID.
Great. Great.
And I think one of the things is like, I think there's kind of a developing backlog, right? Because there is like, what's come out of COVID is a few people have like, kind of straddled around along, and like, so there's going to be, it's not over yet, right? Like there's going to be a backlog. There's going to be more people who have waited long, and now there's going to be kind of a big bubble already building on where people are now going to spend the money. You know, now they have a couple of years to think about it, and they still do. You know.
Yeah, I'll jump back on the relationship point, because I think that's such a powerful point a lot of people miss. And frankly, as an engineer, I love to talk technology and how that's changing.
Sure.
But the relationship, the thing that a manufacturer has that they don't have is they have a customer they cannot say no to. They have operators, they're responsible for those operators, and they can't say, no thank you. Manufacturers, we can. And during COVID, we had a chance to go, hey, that customer is a jerk, right? And we don't have to do business with them. And so relationship became an ultra powerful thing. And I think they started realizing that if they have a relationship with the supplier, it allows technology to move forward, it allows reliability of supply and quality. So I think the big deal is the manufacturer gets to choose. There's customers out there where we said, you know, it's not worth it. It really allowed us to do that, and that's changed, and I think that's changed forever. And relationship drives innovation, drives relationships, drives supply chain.
Did you have any major frustrations? Anything that just really irritated the snot out of you for the past couple of years? Joel, let's start with you. Anything that just really sticks out as like a...
Well, from an equipment perspective, it just seemed like it was just one thing after another, right? The RTU unit, your rooftop units changed. There's been standard changes in other types of industry as well too. So just trying to keep abreast of what those changes are and what the economic impact could be to the franchisees in regards to the cost. I would say the other thing from a supplier standpoint is that some of our suppliers we're good partners, and we're able to absorb some of the cost pressures that actually happened during the COVID period with wage inflation and freight inflation, where other suppliers came to us, and basically said we needed some relief. And so for me, the transparency of what that relief was, for me, it felt like, let's just pick a number and see if they'll take that, right? And so forth too. And so it's important that there's viability and visibility of that. If I'm going to have to communicate to 350 franchisees that your price is going up by X%, I want to be able to credibly support that these are costs that are now embedded into their infrastructure and their supply chain that aren't going to go away, right? And then to be transparent, if it's a surcharge, well, let's talk about when those things actually have milestones so we can evaluate whether or not those still exist or not. So that's the biggest one.
That's a good point. I want to turn to Ray, because you also have that kind of same mindset as a CFO. Similar thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of related to the communication, right? So because you got two suppliers and they communicated very differently. One went kind of radio silent because they had no news, but sometimes you just needed news to communicate, whether it was news around cost, about delivery, about supply assurance. And so, it's very important, even in my seat, you're not just obviously pounding on costs and trying to get costs. It's help me understand, because we have stakeholders, right? And we're just obviously trying to communicate to them, but we need news all the way through the system and backward. It doesn't work like it's one way at my time. It's we need constant, and that's constant communication around costs, constant communication around supply assurance.
Right. And speaking from an engineering standpoint, then, what kind of frustrations did you have, Justin?
Yeah, very similar to that on a granular level though. I want to know componentry. If we have a supply chain issue, we can't get a piece of equipment. What's the piece that's missing here? What is that? Is that something we can work around? Can we source that from somewhere else? Can we do without that and still get by? We need to open restaurants, we need replacements. So maybe we can give a little on some of the features and things. So having that level of granularity down to the part is very important. And then also the foresight of, if we're going to have component changes that affect the operation of the piece of equipment, I need to know well in advance so I can make sure that when that equipment shows up to the restaurant, those people know how to interact with it. They're not getting something they've never seen that's a one-off. There's 3 of these things in the field that nobody knows what the difference is, why they don't work, and then 5 years down the road they have an issue and we can't figure out what's going on. So the really granular level data was if it was missing, it was a big miss for me.
Okay. And
yeah,
Dave,
one other thing though I'd comment too, it prompted me to challenge my team to ask which of our suppliers are vertically integrated and which ones aren't, right?
Okay.
So if they're buying components from another entity that they may have a great partnership or may not, that's obviously a variable that could impact our ability to supply the end product and so forth too. So it doesn't mean that we're only going to partner with those that vertically integrate and build their own components and so forth, but clearly, as we've seen, that seems to be the constant excuse. We're waiting on this one part, right? We were talking about Ford last night where they got 20,000 vehicles missing one thing and so forth as well too. So it's prompted us to really evaluate those partners that actually own the entire supply chain of all the components that make actually the product to be purchased.
And Charlie,
sorry,
sorry, one more thing. I mean, some of the great vendor partners, they continue to innovate, right? Like, I mean, we really appreciated that. Like, I mean, like, well, there was like panini makers in an oven, right? Like you can't pause because there's well, I guess we did all pause, but like you have to continue to innovate while there's a pandemic because, guess what? Hopefully we got out of it, and it's just the bar is higher now, and so the bar is higher for everybody, and so we just need to and some people are already there, and so we just have to if you were cutting costs while trying to save money on innovation, I mean that doesn't come out well when you come out of the pandemic.
Right. So continual investment in R&D is important.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So
let's,
Charlie, since they all took 2, I get 2?
you get 2.
Because they're cheating.
You could go 3.
There's no allocation.
There's cheating.
You can do whatever.
Cheating going on.
Do your thing.
Piss off factor? You know what piss off factor is?
No, I don't.
It's hoarding.
Okay.
Hoarding. I can't tell you what makes a manufacturer so mad is when you get pressured to deliver a piece of equipment and it's got to be there tomorrow. And during COVID, right, when everybody is, to your point, I'm trying to squeeze everything out of this thing, and then I drive by the store, I won't name the brand, it's actually not up here, and the store's not opening for 30 days. Are you kidding me? You called me to get something to the store because it was an emergency? So transparency on forecasting. I think there's my second point is the chains mostly forecasting is a big thing. How many, what are you forecasting for replacement? What are you forecasting for new store openings? And if you were it's not a contract. I just need to know, right? So that we can plan. That creates that relationship and that trust that allows the relationship to grow. But just making me mad is asking for something when you don't need it during those times, right? And hopefully we don't go back to that because there's a lot of movement forward through COVID of transparency and trust and working dynamically together, kind of to your point, right? But I get this feeling that everybody's going to slip back into the old ways. I just worry for that.
So it's a cautionary tale. Learn from what we experienced over the past couple of years and just don't backslide.
Don't backslide on the business planning side and the relationship side, but the relationship side tactically to me is transparency around forecasting, right? And I know it's tough. It's tough on us to run our business, and it all ripples forward and shows up in your laps. We all get it, right? But just be honest. Don't fudge it, right? Don't tell me that Taco Bell is going to open tomorrow when it's really got 2 months. Right?
Let's talk a little bit about adaptation. Each of you touched a little bit upon how your operations have kind of shifted thinking just slightly. Is there one way that you could talk about how you completely changed or adapted due to some of the changes so you avoid backsliding? Is there anything systematically that you've done? Justin,
one thing that I've tried to push is we had a lot of options for a lot of our pieces of equipment. So consolidating up to better options, so that way we're getting the benefits of less SKUs, but I'm also pushing the restaurants in the right direction. So that's working out pretty well. That's a strategic thing that we're trying to do across all of our pieces of equipment where we've got dual sourcing or multiple sourcing options. So that's something that's probably going to stick around for us, hopefully.
Yeah, for me, life lesson was during COVID, we had a few suppliers that struggled financially. And so it's now prompted us to be more assertive in regards to those discussions about their viability and health long term. Again, if it's a partnership, we want to see them be successful on a long-term basis. And so there are ebbs and flows financially and so forth that we need to figure out creative ways to help support as well too. So, but we're being much more direct in those conversations with the suppliers about their financial stability, their growth plans, their CapEx plans and so forth. And it happened before, but it's much more genuine now because of the onset of what came out of COVID, where we saw some failures.
Yeah.
And I would just say, to piggyback on Joel's point here, like, we personally do not want suppliers that are only doing our business.
Okay.
You know, because if we misstep or falter, well, we don't want them to like sink. And so we need. I mean, even though we're a huge chain, 30,000 locations just in the U.S. and Canada, but we want to make sure that they're well diversified. We need like multinational guys that can like absorb some stuff and absorb some costs, like Joel was mentioning, they don't have to pass on everything to us. But if you're working with like less sophisticated guys who are like built their business on you, they need to pass on every nickel. And that's just not how business works.
Yeah. What about Middleby?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, by the way. I think that what I've seen that I hope doesn't go away is the sales and marketing team at the brands of Middleby, their meetings. Listen, inherently in this business, if you're in this business, you have a high personality profile, right? You're very social. And I think the old way, it was a very social society, and relationships and a beer and a glass of wine made deals. And I think we've gone to business relationships where I see the meetings that are taking place are numbers oriented, planning oriented, and that's going to make for a better relationship. So gone are the days. It's nice to have a dinner, right? We're in the food service business. It's nice to have a conversation, but let's get in a business relationship perspective, which means numbers, actions, and I see that in our people. And when they're talking about the customer, they talk factually about the customer's business performance, their profitability, their store traffic, their cost of food and their labor cost.
Okay.
Well said.
I want to turn to Joel to start with this next question,
Yes,
because you kind of mentioned it briefly about just in time. Without giving away any proprietary information, how should the industry, including suppliers and operators, balance just-in-time inventory with bullwhip demand? How do you do that?
Well, it's going to come down to the communication piece, right?
Okay.
To Dave's comment, if we can do a better job of getting forecasts of what that demand was. I was speaking to one of Dave's team earlier and said, hey, if the throttle is that you need a commitment for X number of units to basically fast track those, let's talk about that now, right? And historically, brands would not want to commit, right? Because we don't take title to things. Our franchisees buy these things and so forth. But in our roles, we're there to ensure supply, right? And so to ensure supply and timely ensure supply, just in time, unfortunately, for a lot of these various different pieces of equipment, is not a good reality for us right now. I'm not saying what's going to happen a year from now or 2 years from now that you guys can get back in that cycle and better use your cash, more effectively. But today, I think that's part of the partnership that you're willing to, aka the suppliers willing to actually put some of these units on the floor, understanding that there's going to be a pull and a draw. It's going to have to be a strategic partnership with the actual, entity that's helping procure, but also the brands that buy. Because if the brand changes the spec, that's bad, right? And so forth too. So, but honestly, that's the mindset. I get it from a capital standpoint, especially as things and innovation takes place. You don't want to have a bunch of antiquated equipment that you can't even sell, or you got to fire sell. But the urgency. Many franchisees are not stocking a significant amount of supply of excess equipment for failure, so they still expect it. They could call and pick up the phone and it'd be there in a week. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. So if we can find a more creative way to do this in this interim period and step away from just-in-time on specific pieces of equipment, it makes sense.
Ray, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, he nailed it. It's like forecasting. It's our responsibility too, right? We're doing much better. I can honestly say like we're doing much better. We're pulsing much more frequently, but again, we in our system, we're hurting about 7,000 people trying to forecast on behalf of 7,000 people in 30,000 locations, right? It's not as easy as it seems, right?
It's easy.
Well, and so so that's a challenge, but of course, like we have to do better, right? Like we understand that, and we are trying to do that. But at the same time, like we also need the vendor partners to understand this is a big ticket purchase, right? Like if the food comes every week, smaller purchase. relatively smaller ticket prices. So it's like here you're kind of like going in big and you're going in long, right? So you need to make sure that they have some trepidation, right? Franchisees have some trepidation where they're going to spend out $8,000, $9,000 for one piece of equipment that they're going to have to live with 7, 8 years. So we have to do our responsibility is like educating them on the benefits and ROIs and everything else on the piece of equipment.
Right.
Potentially labor savings or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's going to take some time, and we're probably not going to be accurate 100% of the time.
Right.
And the vendor partners need to understand, like, we're going to probably make some mistakes, but mainly we have a great relationship, and we're doing a good. I think overall, we're doing a pretty smart job and intelligent job doing it.
Did you have some thoughts?
I love what he's saying, right?
Okay.
As a CFO, I love what the CEO is saying, right?
Okay.
Because you would imply if there are much more tighter relationships and if you're going in big and going in long, right? You would argue that your supply chain strategies start changing more to a single source and a dominant supplier source, right? Because that's how you create a better relationship versus a 30-30-30 caveman type approach to purchasing.
Okay, who's going to take him on?
I'm happy to. So I don't disagree that on key priority pieces of equipment, rollouts especially, single sourcing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What I would say though, if I had been single sourced with things like cups, single sourced with things like sausage, we would have been closed.
I don't
right?
make cups.
I know you don't.
I use cups for the coffee and the soda machines, but
Exactly. But I think there is a place, especially with rollouts, that makes sense that you want to be consistent.
Yeah.
Clearly, single source limits your ability to leverage, right, and so forth too. So that has a certain amount of exposure to it, especially if the brand sets a specification that no one else can get in as well too. That's like nirvana, I know, for an equipment manufacturer and so forth logistically. But for us, from a supply chain standpoint, is very cumbersome because then we are pretty much held to that partnership and hopefully a trusting partnership and so forth that isn't going to take advantage and so forth as well.
yeah. But that's true. It's the same story for a rollout
Yep.
versus a ongoing business. I mean, why would the relationship change after the rollout?
Shouldn't.
It shouldn't.
Shouldn't, right.
So you agree with me?
Unless there's a greed factor that drives in, that if you know I'm single sourced
I love this.
and you can
Now I got
drive
two more.
whatever you want from a cost, that's not going to fly.
Just
The after-hours show will be these two. To de-escalate that, I'll change
please.
the topic back to what you were saying.
Okay.
The education
De-escalate?
piece
Yeah,
of it
de-escalate.
is so important. We understand, especially I think us understand what goes into the development, the building, the parts, the bending,
Yeah.
all of the screw, all that. There's a lot that goes into it. That food is different, packaging is fundamentally different. Like you said, this is a piece of equipment you could have for 25 years. Like there's a different level of understanding that we need to do a better job sharing with people. So we've done stuff like bringing our non-equipment people to suppliers to see like this is what goes into this. Like
Yeah.
this is all the things. Like there's not a warehouse, a Home Depot of fryers sitting there for us to just go in and pick one out. Like there's a lot that goes into this. I think that helps set the expectations of we can't just make a decision tomorrow and expect stuff to show up because there's a lot that goes into this. We're not, as much as we like to think we are, we're not the only brand out there buying this stuff. We have to get in line. There's other people buying stuff as well. There's a million pieces that go into this. So the education piece is critical, I think, to that success.
And I think one realization I had in the Yum system and here, like they're small business owners, right? Relatively small business owners. They have personalities, right? Well, if they fall in love with a piece of equipment, I mean, it's very hard to wean them off. Therefore, sometimes you almost need dual source or multi-source because they're in love with multiple pieces of equipment and that they've used for 20-some odd years and probably a generational thing too, So, I mean, part of that is we have to deal with that,
Okay.
Well, what I was excited about, what you said though, is
I take it back, whatever you were saying.
for a second there, I thought you were going to start treating capital equipment different than expense, and that you weren't going to lump us all into a commodity-based coffee cup story, and that equipment was actually a higher value, long play story. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's where
maybe you are a little bit, but
He is. I got a note from the stage management that we got to be a little bit louder. So
Louder.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit
All
louder.
of
do
us
that.
are just not.
Well, Dave, he doesn't need any modulation. Well, maybe he does, but everyone else. Anyway, so Justin, did you tackle that single source issue appropriately? Do you feel like you've left it all on the table?
We've looked at looking at different technologies. So not just getting different suppliers, but is there a different technology we can use? So it's multiple sources, but different. So,
Okay.
but they serve the same purpose in the restaurant. So if we need to open a restaurant, we've got equipment A and equipment B. So it's kind of like what I was saying earlier, pushing things forward, and kind of like weaning ourselves off of the old stuff and into the new stuff at the same time. So we've got the backup plan if we need it, but we're going in the right direction. Everything I'm working on is trying to push us in the right direction in the future, and if we can use secondary sourcing as the way to get there, then I'll definitely take advantage of that.
Okay. How can suppliers pave the way for agreements that don't put customers at risk? Are there certain ways that they can do it operationally or contractually? How do you strike that nice, healthy balance so that the manufacturers don't get burned and you don't get burned? Is there any way to address that question?
So from an agreement perspective, as things have evolved, right? Specifically, we talked about this last night, warranties are becoming a question, right? If I'm an operator of 100 restaurants in the Midwest and I know that there's a long lead time for fryers and a long lead time for ovens, and I'm a smart operator, I'm going to be buying those pieces of equipment, putting them in a warehouse because I know something's going to fail, right? And so our current practices for warranties from an agreement perspective is the day it's sold is the day the warranty starts, right? Well, that's not a reality, right? The operators are doing this because of what's happened from a supply chain perspective. And so working collectively with our manufacturers to find ways that still give the value and the commitment that that manufacturer made when they actually produced the equipment and gave whatever X warranty to it, that franchisee and operator can maximize the value of that warranty. And so that's not going to be for the faint at heart. It will take effort and obviously honesty and trust and so forth along those lines. But to me, I think that's one of the critical areas. The second one is, again, just creatively, our brand, as I think many brands are getting a new injection of ownership into them, specifically private equity ownership. And so they look at the business different than a mom and pop operator would. It's their life, it's their legacy. This is an investment, right? And so manufacturers today may have opportunities to do things more creatively and partnering with leasing companies, having some kind of natural turn with the equipment, because as an ex-operator, if it could last 20 years and we can maintain it, I would do that. That's not music to a manufacturer's ear, but that's the way I looked at it from an investment perspective. I'm not convinced our PE groups are looking at it that way. They're really looking at how they maximize the return and maybe not thinking they're going to keep that piece of equipment for 20 years or even the investment itself and so forth as well too. So creatively, again, whether the manufacturer can do it or partner from a leasing perspective could add some value.
Yeah, and I would say like, you know, you talked about like, hey, are you going to treat CapEx different than your normal OpEx? And then I was like getting into a lease, like a supplier managed leasing program, you know, that is turning it into more of an operating expense on a weekly basis. And I think that would be a game changer for at least the big capital equipment that we're purchasing now. I mean, the rest of the food inflation, I mean, we've heard all about it for the last 18 months or whatever. You know, so like people have tight margins, you know, and so maximizing like cash outflow right now, I mean, that's like, you know, or I would say minimizing cash outflow, it is like critical in what we do.
I think sticking with the theme, you got to think differently. I love what they're saying. And I can see how through COVID, we've got to change our business practices. And one of my fundamental beliefs is that the food service operator, while they love their equipment, it's not their highest priority. Their highest priority is taking care of their customers, serving great food, and their team members, right? And so somehow facilitating that mindset through a financial structure that allows for us to maintain the equipment even better, right? And I think that after sales service and support thing, there's some meat on that bone.
There is.
Right?
Agreed.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked about this last night, but equipment for some people is like, it's not top of mind until there's an issue, and then it's a big issue, and it's shutting down the restaurant. They're not able to serve food, so changing that mindset for people and getting people engaged in the service and maintenance and stuff like that, that's a huge component to that I think is a big opportunity.
Yeah,
it's
and
underserved.
equipment's not what it was before, right? There's
Right.
so much more technology built into it. So I had a half a dozen engineers that would go work on equipment, but when it came into more advanced technology, that was not their trade, right? And so now you're trying to train somebody, by scale that doesn't make sense. So if the manufacturer can find a more effective way to help us maintain those pieces of equipment, have the expertise, I mean, God forbid, we're changing out boards that don't even need to be changed out, right? Because they just don't know, and so forth as well too. And so as this technology continues to develop, it really beholdens the manufacturers to help us find a solution to where we can maintain it for whatever its life expectancy is.
And that goes back to your point too on the warranty stuff with the visibility to know this piece of equipment was in storage, it's turned online this date. Like that helps all of us out. Same with the replacement parts too, visibility and using the technology to help both of us out on that.
Yeah, Charlie, I would say, you think COVID caused change? This, to your point, the technology, the data, the control systems on fryers and ovens and combi ovens, the whole, what you're talking about, that's going to revolutionize. So we've got to do your business modeling changes to what you're saying, because COVID was nothing to what technology is going to do to the purchasing cycle. It's going to completely change the relationship and purchasing cycle of equipment.
Agreed.
Right? It's like I buy a car. I buy a car. I'm an automotive engineer. I used to know everything about my car, the size of the engine, the transmission, the differential. I don't know that anymore. I worry about the sensors, the backup camera. Can it drive itself?
Right.
All that stuff. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to be, and it's going to, the only way to solve this problem is through thinking about the relationship differently.
Right.
And that kind of lends itself to a very serious problem in our industry, which is the availability of service technicians.
Oh my goodness.
We've got a huge lack of service technicians in the industry, and they're so critical. I think one of the things that you said at one time was that the operators, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are focused on who made the stuff and who's going to fix it. And those are the two critical points of connection. Would you agree with that? And how do we address this supply chain challenge, or the service challenge? Any magic
It's a tough
bullets?
one.
Tough one.
I don't have an answer.
You might need a new panel here.
Well, but I mean,
You're
is it
supposed to
a
be the
track?
young smart one. You're supposed to answer this
Give us
question.
screwdrivers, we'll go out there and take care of it. Yeah, that's a tough one.
All right, then I'll shift gears a little bit.
Well, no, I think it's some of it is it goes into nowhere land on taking care of it, right? And kind of if you have a kitchen that's single source from one supplier, and then they're responsible for it, and it takes it, then the manufacturer is going to have to solve that problem that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, we're probably better capable of solving it than a restaurant operator, right?
But after warranty, that's
and when
But-
does the warranty start?
But I would say too, manufacturers need to commit to those that want to do in-house support and maintenance, that have scale to do that, to have the training and facilities and ongoing training to be able to do that, right? As an operator, I had half a dozen guys with trucks and equipment and so forth. I took ownership of it. I knew what was going to be done, when it was going to be done, how it was prioritized. So there still is a scale for that, but eventually I think technology is going to pass those guys by, unfortunately, and then we have to have a plan to be able to make sure we maintain that equipment. And that's more than likely going to be a partnership with the manufacturer or with some other type of resource.
Right. I want to shift gears slightly to a brief discussion about policy issues. And this, to start off, is not necessarily a policy issue, but more of a cultural and a societal issue. Has to do with ESG reporting. So as we expect more manufacturers to provide an understanding of the carbon footprint impact of their equipment, does that play a role in supply chain bottlenecks, and also does it play a role in the suppliers that you choose?
I would tell you that brands definitely value, like on a promotional basis, like on the ESG credentials. I think from the guys who we serve are franchisees, and I would say like your average franchisee, I think they're much more cost conscious than sustainability conscious. Now, I mean, there's one or two that will ask the right questions on the boards, but I think overall, that they're pretty much more cost conscious currently.
Right. Okay.
I would agree. I mean, our brands made a commitment by 2030 to have a certain reduction in greenhouse gas based off of our footprint, and so clearly the building facilities and equipment are a huge component of that. Obviously, as you'd expect, the food items that we obviously sell to our guests are a huge component of it as well too. So it's becoming more and more of a measurement factor. Is it a decision factor? I'm going to buy this broiler versus this broiler, this fryer versus this fryer. Not today, but it could be a differentiator that a supplier could say, I actually remit X lower carbon footprint, and if you scaled this times your restaurants over the next X years, this could take this amount off of the equation. Right. And if all things are equal and our franchisees are just as happy with that piece of equipment versus another, that could be a tipping point.
Yeah.
But I agree with Ray. The average operator doesn't feel like the consumer's that concerned about it. It's more from an investment perspective. Right. So they're not willing to pay for it today, right? May not be an option at some point in time, depending on how the brands actually articulate and enforce, specific requirements and specifications. Yeah. But there's not an appetite that I'm going to buy this unit and pay an X% premium for it because it has less carbon footprint. I mean, it just would not even affect their.
I think the only difference to that is, like, I don't know the answer to this, but what would be the difference between carbon footprint from manufacturing and then use? So if I can say the long-term total cost of ownership is less, and that's emitting less carbon, that's probably better than saving a little bit on the manufacturing, because I'm going to have that piece of equipment every day for a dozen years or so. So, like, I don't know what that answer is of how big of an impact is the manufacturing versus the use of it, but that would be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, and I would say that there are some situations where it's like really win-win, like without with some technology breakthrough, you can do hot, cold, not the energy usage goes down. I mean, those are things definitely like you said, it cost you, total cost and use, but there are win-win things like that, like. But yes, I mean, do you want to replace out some specific refrigerant or whatever, which gives no additional value? That's a tough one, right? Yeah. But energy savings, people care about energy savings, especially in this environment where, energy is a pretty big line item on the expense account now.
I'll chase that. I think, well, first of all, it's much different for a manufacturer than somebody that's facing the consumer, B2C, which you guys are. So it does affect the image of the brands, and I appreciate it at the restaurant level. But Ray, that's a great point. If the cost of energy, the cost of water, water filtration, ice machines, energy usage, it actually has a P&L impact, and it's a double dip. Yeah. You actually get a footprint impact too at the same time. But I can't, those pressures, those governmental pressures versus just staying alive, trying to run the restaurant, trying to keep it open, and the labor cost, $20 an hour, I don't think it's high on the franchisee's priority when they're just trying to make a living.
I don't think we have the luxury to make that a priority
But it will.
It will be, I agree. But trying to get stuff to open restaurants, like, it's not going to pick one thing over another. I just need something.
It's not that critical. Well, one of the things.
Sorry, Charlie, one more thing, and I think we were talking about this last night. Like, there's some states though they're going to force us into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So so that's kind of like something reality that we have to deal with anyway, and we probably know which state we're talking about. Like, it's very aggressive about it, and we've done things to, like jump through hoops to actually address it. So that's probably going to be the new tougher standard.
Right.
Which I don't think manufacturers are going to have a standard for that one state and everybody else. It's pretty much going to be the standard for everybody.
Yeah.
All joking aside, I mean, that's the fact is, why would a manufacturer not be proactive on that? Because it's all over the news, right?
Yeah.
It's on CNBC and Fox News and all that stuff. It's all over. So we should be, it's a call to action to get ahead of it, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
That's when it is our responsibility. It's your responsibility to single source. It's our responsibility to have solutions ahead of your need.
Right. On a discount basis, we should probably talk about that.
And related to government policy, a couple things that NAFEM has been working on since the Section 232, the steel and aluminum tariffs, and then the Section 301 China import tariffs have been brought in. We've been fighting them, or at least expressing manufacturers' viewpoints on those. And we also were working on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and the Federal Maritime Commission, just to kind of get a little bit more teeth behind monitoring shipping costs. So my question to you in relation to those activities is, what kind of role do you think that government policy has on supply chain issues? Does it have a role? Does it not have a role?
Oh, absolutely. One thing I would encourage, and it's interesting to hear that you guys have had some initiatives that you've tried to get some legislation or at least some audience with various different legislators. Right. I would encourage you to start working with the brands of your manufacturing customers, right? So we take an entourage of a couple dozen people a year to Capitol Hill. We have a pack. We talk about things that are important to our business, including supply chain. So there's multi-sourcing. If I need produce from Mexico because there's rains in Salinas, California, I need produce, right? We got to still sell a Whopper. So that same scenario, I think we could potentially partner. We're always looking for good ammunition in regards to when we're talking to Center Blunt and talking to whoever it might be of what's important to our business. And your success, this industry's success from an equipment perspective, is a critical heartbeat, piece of our puzzle. And so if we can help support you in those initiatives and in that engagement, really would encourage. And again, it will take your manufacturer partners to reach out to their brand partners, because they're the ones that are already doing that on an ongoing basis.
Right. Got it.
And I think in the Taco Bell system, they do a very good job of exactly what you're saying, Joel. They're bringing a lot of big franchisees into Washington. I mean, obviously, all of a sudden you have like a lot of representation from a lot of congressmen, congresspeople, and also senators and stuff like that, who, obviously at the local level, a lot of these franchisees are doing like some, a lot of work. Yeah. And so it's good to have like 20 Congress people, in the room, and then and there's a small business angle to it, and obviously there's a brand angle, and then from the co-op perspective, we've done a good job of representing it.
Charlie, that's a call to action
I
for
know.
NAFEM.
Yeah, it is.
You can get us organized to support them.
Yeah.
A couple more powerful voices in the room would only support that brand.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a NAFEM job.
Right. Looking forward to it.
You agree with that?
Absolutely.
There you go.
So there we go. That's on my to-do list.
All right.
So let's talk about a little bit. Any last-minute thoughts before we turn to audience questions? Because I know the audience has a couple questions, but any last-minute thoughts before we turn to them?
No, I love these conversations. Yeah. I love, because we all kind of knew this. It starts force ranking the supply chain issues in my mind. The issues that we went through with COVID, and then we start talking about technology, and then we talk about the change the evolution and revolution that's going on in the kitchens due to labor and food cost and speed of service and all that drive-through pressure, right? So, I mean, the struggles you're having are the struggles you're having, and we need to step up and give you solutions, not just have a relationship, but give us solutions. It was a big call to action from what I can see.
Yeah, I would just be careful, right? Like, and then look, I'm a finance guy. We're always pessimistic, right? Just I just want to be careful. Like,
amen.
So I mean, the headline news are kind of getting better. Inflation's down. This is down. Like, capacity's back in, but I don't think it's over yet. I mean, I think we have to be like eyes wide open, because I think we're. Again, I mentioned the backlog thing. I think people, over the last couple of years have kind of like hung on to their money. And I think the brands are still requiring a lot of upgrades, investments. I think it's going to, I mean, I see positive in that front for the equipment manufacturers, but I think these challenges are probably going to be exaggerated in other ways.
Yeah, interesting.
For me, I just would like to thank our supplier community. You guys are what keeps our lights on, obviously continues to allow us to serve guests. So what I would challenge is help us solve problems, right? And really get intentional in that interaction with the brands, with your customers and so forth, because you may be able to solve a problem that's not even in a space that you're in today, because of the engineering expertise, because of the manufacturing capabilities that you have. And so really would encourage to be as assertive as possible, because we may be able to open a restaurant with all the components, but without one thing. And if you can help us solve that problem, that's a win for everybody, obviously, on a long-term basis.
Okay, Justin?
Yeah, I would say it kind of sums up a little bit of what everybody said in some other questions, but being proactive instead of reactive. When there's issues or potential benefits for our restaurants, like bring that to us instead of us having to come ask for it. And then it's going to be 18 months, 2 years to get something out. Like, come with the solutions that are already being worked on or developed early on, so we can be a player along with that and provide input early on.
Yeah. That sounds like a call to do your homework first before they come and visit Taco Bell.
There you go.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Let's open the floor. Any questions that anyone would like to raise? We've got Adair from the NAFEM team has a microphone, and she's not afraid to use it. So anybody have any questions that you want to ask these fine gentlemen? Nothing at all.
Not one
You know
question.
I have one.
Amazing. I think people
Charlie,
yes.
you know I have a question.
Please.
Oh, great.
We talked earlier today, we heard a different panel talk about workforce development. And so how do you approach that as part of your critical supply chain, in that you have equipment, you then have ingredients, but you either need people or automation to really deliver your product to the consumer, at least? How do you think about workforce development?
I think from my perspective as an engineer, making their job easier and better so people want to come work at Taco Bell. There's a lot of other places they can work, so if we can do things on the equipment side, the smallware side, to improve that experience and take out the tasks that people don't want to do, it makes it more attractive to retain talent versus a constant churn of people in and out.
So for me, it's multifold. As we do business reviews with suppliers, I'm talking about how they're developing people, how they're retaining, because it's the same thing as an operator you would want to know as well too. So what are they doing to attract engineers to want to come to work for their company, to retain them and those creative ideas? I think to the question on automation, clearly the workforce, specifically that line level, entry level position in the fast food industry is becoming harder and harder to capture. It didn't have the same glamour it might have had when in the 70s and 80s, where it was a cool first job and so forth.
Yeah.
So we're struggling as an industry to attract those talent. And so we're just at a reality place here that we're going to have to automate more, because we're going to have to do more with less. That's just the reality.
Right.
Those that are there, we just need to make sure that they have a great experience and don't have to do things that are exorbitantly difficult, right? And so standing on your tiptoes and hoping that the thing's going to fry itself and so forth, or maybe it's heavy, it's hard to clean, whatever the scenario might be, and so forth. So it's super important that as an industry, we're thinking about the end user as well too.
Good.
Yeah, and so I'm a father of 2 teenagers who work in quick serve restaurants on the weekends, right? Like, and I don't know what kind of focus they need. I'm constantly worried about, like, I mean, I kind of want them to be automated out of the job, because like I watch them with their phone all the time. Like, listen, you know, just make sure that, you know, we have a better experience for the guests is through automation. I think that you can drive that.
Yeah. Curious, where do your kids work?
So they work for a local chain in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So not a Subway.
No.
Okay.
I'm trying to. Well, anyway, we'll talk about it.
Dave?
You know, I just had an interesting conversation this morning with a chain. They had 30-some restaurants, but their minimum was $17 an hour. Their average wage was $22 an hour. And they're looking for another 5% wage increase this year. On top of that, they supply benefits to every employee. And benefits were going to go up somewhere between 12 and 16%. So my point is that employee is going to become extremely valuable. So you have to deploy that employee in a very effective way. And I think it allows them to, technology in the kitchen allows you to shift your employees to focus on customer care, right? And front counter and beyond the front counter. So I think it's about, the money is there. I mean, the money is growing, and so you've got these people coming in, and they've got good paying jobs. And so now we have to make them very valuable and give them the tools and the technology and the systems and the processes to actually generate profitable stores, right? But I think that you just can't, it's not, gone are the days of inexpensive labor. It's just gone.
Totally.
To your point, kind of your eyes wide open. It's not over yet. Settle down. Right? Don't get too happy. Don't celebrate. I think labor is that story, right?
Yeah. And that's part of the whole supply chain equation. You got to have labor in order to have anything else.
Good point. Great point.
Gentlemen, yes. I think we've got time for this one last question.
Oh man. Hey guys, I'm coming from the food brand side, and you guys talked about how this is a long play. on the equipment side. Can you talk through the considerations between the food that's going through the equipment that you're purchasing? How do you think through that? Does that create limitations if you buy one piece of equipment on what you can buy on the food side, and vice versa?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, we've got to have a close relationship with culinary at the brands that we support and so forth, and what they're thinking about today and what they're thinking about a year from now and 3 years from now. Because to your point, if we buy a piece of equipment that can perfectly cook this platform and this protein or this item and so forth, but it doesn't solve what they really believe is the next trajectory for us from a growth perspective, it's super nearsighted. So it's really upon us to be challenging, asking those questions. I would argue it's also upon our manufacturing partners to be asking us as procurement people questions as well too, that we can relay to the culinary teams, to the marketing teams and innovation teams as well too, to where we don't miss it, right? You don't want to buy something and then turn around and have to buy whether alternative components to it or replace it because you missed the mark and you were just this close. That'd be my...
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at it constantly, right? Like we were, I mean, it's very public knowledge. Subway is going to be doing in-store slicing, right? Where every single slicer is going, every Subway in the U.S. and Canada. I mean, a couple of folks in the audience here have done a terrific job of like ramping that up, but that's a major shift, right? Like into like in-store slicing. I know it sounds like, oh, it's not that hard, but you know, just imagine trying to get all that equipment, but also like transition from the food side. Sure. And I think like that just requires a lot of market testing, a lot of like data collection, and just like looking at yields. And so that's like, from a supply chain perspective, I think we have to be very careful when we're making a really good decision, and we're not shortcutting. I mean, it's a kind of like what Joel's saying, like involving every single stakeholder, and culinary team, marketing team, right? The chief marketing officer, also like just the operators. I mean, it's a very heavy lift to try to get this right.
Yeah, exciting times.
I love that. Great question. Great question. Sarcastically, I would say, at the brand level, I love a chef that specifies a food for one piece of equipment. That's it. And so then they have to buy like 700 different pieces of equipment. Seriously, I think that's one of the huge opportunities. That's why at Middleby we have hundreds upon hundreds of chefs, and there's the equipment. It's always shocking to me how a brand will not understand that this oven or this grill or whatever can't do these other things, through culinary. A great chef can take a Turbo Chef oven or a Nickel broiler, and it's shocking what they can do. And you really need to push the food people to be inventive on the existing technology, right? And that's working to get back to the relationship.
Yeah.
Justin?
Yeah, the hard thing for us is at scale, if we're going to add features to equipment for not a rollout, not a single source rollout, getting to a point where we can actually roll a product out, because we've got 7,000 restaurants in the US. If we've got it in 3,000 restaurants, we can't create a new product and serve it in all their restaurants. So thinking ahead where we can add features in, and then once we've got a big enough scale, then it becomes a platform that we can use with the food. So we work very closely with the food team. Like, are there things that you want to be able to do in the future? Like, if we could have every piece of Middleby equipment in our restaurant, like what features, what functionality do you want? And then how can we incorporate that into some of the stuff we're already buying today?
It's a great question.
Good. Well, that's a good place for us to end it. So want to remind you that this session will be posted to N+ and available after the show. Want to say a sincere thanks to our panelists, Dave, Ray, Joel, and Justin, and all of you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. So thank you, all of you.
Nice job, Charlie. Nice job.
Thanks for bearing with Dave.
All right. And please enjoy the rest of the NAFEM show.